police violence. LVMH directors are also questioning Tiffany's ability to cover its debt obligations. It is 6:39 on Wall Street. That's time for the Bloomberg Green Report. Here with that is Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
In the latest example of how the traditional fossil fuel industry is changing, HollyFrontier Corporation announced it will repurpose its Cheyenne refinery. HollyFrontier plans to invest as much as $175 million to convert the facility to produce clean fuel. The plant will stop consuming crude oil by the end of next month. Then it will be converted to produce renewable diesel, which is typically made from soybean oil, recycled cooking oil, and animal fat. HollyFrontier says the plant should be back online by the first quarter of 2022, producing about 90 million gallons of renewable diesel per year. Dozens of small refineries across the country are bracing for a spike in cost to comply with the renewable fuel standard. With the conversion in Cheyenne, HollyFrontier will stand to benefit from the program, which mandates that refineries blend biofuel into gasoline. Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Jeff, thanks. S&P futures moving higher this morning, up 14 points. Dow futures a gain of 180. NASDAQ futures higher by 35 points. European stocks moving higher as well. The 10-year Treasury down 5/30 seconds, yield 0.70%, 2-year yield 0.16%. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Jenny Liss, Jewish communal leader and philanthropist, talks about why she chose the Jewish Communal Fund for her family's charitable giving.
For a lot of people, it would be the convenience factor. I don't have to track anything.
If charitable giving is an important part of your life, JCF can help you organize your philanthropy with our donor-advised fund. A fund can be established with a minimum tax-deductible contribution of $5,000. Make grants to your favorite charities, and JCF handles all the administration and reporting.
At the year end, our board awards community grants from fees and endowment income to UJ's annual campaign. We also make gifts to specific organizations, the elderly, Holocaust survivors, the hungry. The fact that we come together as a community at the end of the year to build community, that's what makes us different.
Get better at giving back. To find out more about JCF's impact, visit jcfny.org and download the Giving Report. JCF, we have a gift for giving.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits Look.
If you can build that flat-pack wardrobe without looking at the instructions, you've still got it. If you can manage 5 keepy uppies on your first go, you've without question still got it. If you can toss a pancake to the ceiling and not let it hit the floor, surely you've still got it. And if you can just about fit into those jeans you bought 5 years ago, you've definitely still got it. Brute, still got it.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed, retrieve data fast. Scalability, grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity, easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price of £200 for 26 terabytes. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
Get your cook on with Asda, with Uncle Ben's rice 250 grams for just £1. And our Butcher's Selection chicken breast fillets only £3.40 for 650 grams. Why not whack it in the wok? At Asda, we're committed to low prices every day on the quality products you need. Asda. Selected stores and lines subject to availability.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game, from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update. Special report: protests across America. Demonstrators across the nation in close contact could be spreading more than just their message. Virus spread has health officials concerned.
U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Jerome Adams says he expects more COVID-19 cases nationally due to the George Floyd protests. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio agrees.
There's no question there's a danger this could intensify the spread of the coronavirus.
The coronavirus is also affecting the 2020 Republican nomination convention. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper isn't planning on easing social distancing guidelines, and 3 Republican officials say Mr. Trump will therefore not accept the nomination in Charlotte. I'm John Lawrence reporting.
Protests were largely peaceful and the nation's streets calmer than they've been in days since the killing of George Floyd set off demonstrations. There was a marked quiet overnight compared with unrest of the past few nights. I'm John Trout.
Why all the top-tier experts? Because business is not a magic trick.
Give us a sense of the economic backdrop.
Bloomberg Markets.
Which financial records are these?
Weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Futures are higher with S&P futures up 14 points this morning. Dow futures up 179. NASDAQ futures up 32. The DAX in Germany's up 2 1/3%. 10-year Treasury down 5/30 seconds, yield 0.70%. The yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.5% or 18 cents at $36.64 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.5% or $8.90 at $17.25.10 an ounce. The euro 1.1209 against the dollar. British pound 1.2588 and the yen 108.74. And Warner Music Group saying its initial public offering of 77 million shares priced today at $25 per share. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, demonstrators were out again in many cities across the nation. It was relatively peaceful. Bloomberg's John Tucker in New York has more in this live report.
And Michael, an earlier curfew, more police added up to a mostly peaceful night in New York City here. Demonstrators trying to cross the Manhattan Bridge from Brooklyn, they were turned back and dispersed. There was a report of looting in downtown Brooklyn, but nothing like Monday night. Members of George Floyd's family joined tens of thousands protesting in Houston. Law enforcement deployed a pepper spray-style chemical and rubber bullets against protesters at Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. And protesters in Los Angeles called for the police chief's job. In Brockton, Massachusetts, a tense night as protesters faced off with state and local police. At Boston Police Headquarters, police officers took a knee at the request of protesters in an act of solidarity. John Tucker, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Thank you, John. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thanks. We're live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios where it's just before 6:49 on Wall Street. Time now to check what's going on in D.C. Some of the top stories in our nation's capital include President Trump saying the GOP is forced to look for another location for its national convention this summer. The Senate holding a hearing today on bias in the Russia investigation despite protests and the coronavirus. And controversial Congressman Steve King ousted in Iowa's Republican primary. Also making news, a growing backlash for President Trump over that photo op this week. Bloomberg U.S. politics editor Kathleen Hunter joins me now. And, of course, this is about the breaking up of a peaceful protest before President Trump held up a Bible in front of the burned-out St. John's Church across the street from the White House. It doesn't seem as though there are many people on either side of the political spectrum that seem willing to defend the tactics here, Kate.
Yeah, I think the most significant thing, really, Nathan, has been the degree to which we've seen Republicans, both Republican lawmakers in Congress and Republican governors, really, if not criticizing Trump, at least, being silent, not coming out in support of him, which I think in this case, their silence says a lot. We are never surprised really to see Democrats coming out and criticizing the president, but when, we don't have Republicans backing him up or in some cases, coming out openly and offering up criticism or saying that he might not have handled it correctly, I think that's pretty significant.
We have seen in the past Republicans fall silent when the president is seen as crossing some kind of political line. It hasn't overall, though, eroded his support among, the base of the Republican Party or many elected Republican leaders. Do you expect that pattern to change in any way after this?
Well, it's definitely worth noting that a number of prominent evangelical leaders did come out in strong support of the president's actions. And so that certainly speaks to at least a slice of the president's base. And so it definitely, the actions that he took definitely weren't uniformly received negatively. There certainly was a segment that's out there that received it positively. And I think that is part of what his intention was to reach that segment. And, we have seen his support among his base be very, very resilient in polls through everything from the coronavirus to impeachment to the special counsel Robert Mueller's hearings. So I think that, there's not really a reason to think necessarily that that's going to change, but I think it will be worth watching going forward, if these protests fade into the background or if they still continue to be a prominent issue, if that does have an effect on his support both from lawmakers and from voters in general.
Now, of course, Joe Biden has been hoping that a lot of people were watching his reaction. He gave his first major speech in months at the Philadelphia City Hall yesterday, and the focus, of course, was on the unrest and relations between police and the African-American community. How was that address by the presumptive nominee received?
Well, I think it gave Biden an opportunity to draw a pretty sharp contrast with Trump in terms of his approach to these issues. He talked a lot about, calming violence, bringing people together, fostering unity, perhaps not to the extent that people wanted, but as well, talking about making changes, the structural racism that exists in America. So I think that those are the types of things that Biden will continue to hammer on going forward. Now, whether or not that really is enough to energize black voters, particularly young black voters who might be looking for more concrete proposals from whoever is, going to be the alternative to Trump. I think that remains an open question. So we're going to have to watch and see in some of the polling how these developments, might affect Biden's support.
Yeah, particularly because it can be argued that a lot of these same issues that have arisen now existed during the Obama administration. We had a number of incidents of police or black Americans being killed at the hands of police, and it raises the question of whether former Vice President Biden can address those issues effectively, given that an administration that he served in oversaw them for 8 years.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a vulnerability of Biden's and one that I would expect the Trump campaign to try to exploit. That's a line of reasoning that we've already heard out there. I think that, taking it a step further, this issue of the treatment of Black Americans by police goes back, decades, if not longer. And so I think that Biden is someone who, even prior to serving in the Obama administration, spent a very long career in the Senate, was a chairman and ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. And so I think that does open him up to questions as to why he hasn't, done what he has done in his, multi-decade career as a public servant to address these issues, and whether, the state that the U.S. is in right now might point to his inability to do that. That's certainly going to be one of the criticisms that he'll face.
And interestingly, with all this going on, today the Senate Judiciary Committee, led by Lindsey Graham, is holding a hearing on what President Trump has called Obamagate, and former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is going to be back on Capitol Hill. What are we expecting to come out of that hearing today?
Well, I think that this, from a political standpoint, is again, that committee is going to be chaired by Lindsey Graham, a close ally of Trump's, and I think that it is, the next in a series of attempts to talk about something other than the coronavirus and now the protests that are unfolding across the U.S. It's a chance for Republicans to again highlight their criticism of the Justice Department and the FBI under the Obama administration, and bring some fresh oxygen to Trump's claims that there are anti-Trump forces at work, or at least were during the Obama administration, which has been kind of a rallying cry to his base since he ran in 2016. And
we've seen the president tweeting ahead of that hearing this morning, so it stands to reason that he'll be paying attention, if nothing else.
Well, definitely. We know that the president likes to live tweet essentially these hearings, or his reactions to these types of hearings, as they're going on. So I think, we shouldn't be surprised if we see that happen again today.
All right. Bloomberg U.S. Politics Editor Kathleen Hunter, thank you, as always. Karen?
All right, Nathan, thank you. It is 6:55 on Wall Street. It's time for the Bloomberg NJIT STEM Report. It is brought to you by New Jersey Institute of Technology, a top 100 national university, and the latest U.S. News and World Report college rankings. Learn more at news.njit.edu. And here's what's happening in science, technology, engineering, and math. In a proposed class action lawsuit, 3 consumers allege Google surreptitiously amasses billions of bits of information about Internet users, even if they opt out of sharing their information. The lawsuit argues that while Google lets users turn off data collection when using its Chrome web browser, other Google tools used by websites scoop up data anyway. The suit includes claims for invasion of privacy and violations of federal wiretapping laws. A Google spokesman said, quote, "We strongly dispute these claims, and we will defend ourselves vigorously against them." Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is not backing down over that decision to leave up posts from President Trump. A number of employees felt the post violated company policies against violent rhetoric. At a staff meeting, Zuckerberg said the post did not clearly incite violence. And it's a sign of modern-day technology. The astronauts launched into orbit by SpaceX joined in the ringing of the opening bell for the NASDAQ yesterday. They took part in the ceremony from the International Space Station 3 days after their launch by Elon Musk's company. Their image, along with the live stream pictures of other NASA staff, lit up the NASDAQ marquee in New York's Times Square. And that's today's Bloomberg NJIT STEM Report. Futures this morning are higher. S&P futures are up about 13 points. Dow futures up 159. NASDAQ futures up 33. 10-year Treasury down 4/32, yield 0.69%. And the yield on the 2-year is at 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 2.2% at $36 a barrel. The yen at 108.73. The euro 1.1204. And Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz. All straight ahead for Nathan Hager. I'm Karen Moscow, and this is Bloomberg.
Influential conversation.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Hairbands to kids.
Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs. Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. and wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
Ready for some straight talk on what's happening in the MLB? On the Barstool Sports Podcast starting 9, Dallas Brayton and Jared Carrabis cut through the BS to break down the league the way they really see it.
Yeah, we're continuing our little mini-series of college baseball coaches in addition to bringing you major league players from throughout the league. If you've been listening to Starting 9 for some time now, you know that we've had a big leaguer on every single episode for probably 2 years now.
Search Starting 9 on TuneIn to listen.
Hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military.
The country is crying out for leadership. Leadership that can unite us. Leadership that brings us together.
The political risk environment usually comes from the rest of the world.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrell, and Lisa Abramowitz.
From New York City for our audience worldwide, good morning, good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance with equity futures positive once again. We're live on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tom Keene. I'm Jonathan Farrow together with Lisa Abramowitz. And Tom, once again, we focus on the following. The peaceful protests in the day, rightfully demanding change, replaced by riots overnight. And there's a real hope this Wednesday morning that we have finally broken that pattern and we can focus on the former and not the latter.
I love the way you put that, John, that we've finally broken the pattern. There's no question about it, folks. I was on the police scanner last night, John, and just absolutely extraordinary to see the police of New York monitor the peaceful protests as people moved to where they were going, not at the exact moment of curfew, but an hour or two later, how police monitored people home. And absolutely, the media has it right this morning, John. It was a relative calm.
A relative calm compared to the chaos of the last several nights before, Tom. And the focus this morning, I think, really to sharpen the focus, the data, the labour market data that comes today and continues through to Friday, Tom.
There's no question. We have ADP today, then claims tomorrow. John, people modeling under 2 billion claims, which certainly would be constructive to that really ugly May report. We know it's going to be ugly. The suits and ties are going to tell us, John, it's a lagging indicator. Well, there's nothing lagging about it to the hardship that all Americans are facing. Everyone, even if they're employed, John, to our worldwide audience, I really want to emphasize this. Even if you're fully employed in America, you are touched by this depression, unemployment.
We've said it repeatedly, Tom, on this program, that those words that we hear uttered every single week about things getting better, a little comfort to the people that make up those ugly statistics. Lisa, the data out a little bit later this morning, then it's full speed ahead to Payrolls Friday.
Yeah, 8:15 a.m. Wall Street time is when we get those May ADP numbers. The other things I'm looking at today, at 9:45 a.m., we're going to get some feeling for the services sector with composite PMIs as well as May services PMIs. And then 1:15 p.m., President Trump has lunch with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. This is closed to the press. I don't find this lunch particularly interesting. What I find interesting, John, is that this is the only thing that we know of on President Trump's schedule today amid the growing unrest across the nation when people are looking to the White House to try to get a sense of what his response is going to be.
I imagine that schedule might shift and change in the hours to come, Lisa, but really well said. There's a huge focus on what the president does next down in Washington, D.C. And joining us from Washington, I'm really pleased to say, is Kevin Cirilli, our chief Washington correspondent. Kevin, fantastic to catch up with you, sir. We're trying to get our hands around the political fallout. Talk to me about the Washington that you wake up this morning.
Well, the Washington that I wake up to this morning is much like the situation playing out across the country, Jonathan, and that is the protests last night here in the nation's capital were largely calm. From a political standpoint, I've got my eye on what Lisa was talking about. How is the president going to communicate this morning? He's going to double down, I'm told, on the issue of law and order, because the political reality for folks not living in cities, I'm told by a senior source on the president's re-election campaign, is vastly different than those who went to bed last night with helicopters and the sounds of sirens. Now, in contrast to that, Biden's presidential campaign is doubling down on the issue of racial equality, and I'm hearing that we're going to continue hearing that theme and seeing more of the former vice president this week in the days to come.
Kevin Cirilli, real simple here, and I don't mean to be snarky about it, but it's certainly a pattern made. The president seems to have a daily photo op. Where's the daily photo op on this Wednesday?
I'm not sure that we know where the president would have that. And I hear you on the issue of the photo op, which has been an incredibly divisive issue in American politics. But, I put this question to a senior advisor on the president's re-election campaign yesterday. And what this source told me, Tom, was, look, they are banking on the fact that law and order, something that the president campaigned on in 2016, is going to help him win back a certain population of suburbs, as well as to hold together the base. Polling would suggest that the president's disapproval rating is above 50%. Any first-term president that has had a disapproval rating above 50%, that is typically forecasted for there to be trouble for that incumbent in November.
Very good. Kevin Cirilli, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate reporting, and I mean reporting, folks, from Mr. Cirilli in Washington. And, of course, the curfew will be continuing in New York through the week as well. John, you mentioned the markets, and I really want to emphasize today there's a new correlation in force to the upfeel of the things that go up and the ebbing away of safe havens. John, I know you saw Euro through 112, and what's absolutely bizarre is completely removed from everything we're reporting on our political relations.
It's a sharp contrast, isn't it, Tom? A country absolutely shaken, contrasted with the single-mindedness of the market. And let's think about what the market is really focused on. It's fueled by monetary policy about a better year ahead, maybe, and we improve as the year grows older. And it's focused on reopening. And what we've seen over the last several days, Tom, the last several weeks for that matter, is a real cyclical rotation in the equity market domestically, but outperformance in Europe too. But from the equity side and pushing that view through the FX market, we've moved 4 figures on euro dollar in just over a week, from 108 north of 112.
Well, we welcome all of you to our simulcast on radio and on television. And as John and Lisa and I really believe, it's about the quality of the guest conversations. It's easy to say that Jared Bernstein was an advisor on economics and on politics to Vice President Biden. But far more importantly, he is one of the liberal economists, progressive economists in Washington that every conservative reads and studies. He's been doing it for decades, Economic Policy Institute, and now at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Jared, we are thrilled you're with us today. What is the Biden mandate forward? What does Vice President Biden need to do to speak not to those committed to him, but the marginal voters looking for the Biden message? What does he need to say?
Well, first of all, it's always great to start the day with the three of you. It's just fascinating to hear, just sitting here in the green room listening to your rap. The vice president is running for office in the midst of really 3 crises: a COVID crisis, a health crisis, that is, an economic one, which of course stems from the health crisis, and now just an outpouring of racial violence, which, as I think I heard at least implicit in some of your comments, feels very justified for a lot of people. And this is the time, as you just played some tape of him saying, to bring the nation together and to restore a competent federal sector, something we so sorely lack, that can meet the kind of shocks that come at a global economy fast and furiously, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's massive inequality or whether it's the kind of environmental degradation we've had. We need a competent amply funded federal sector that has the capacity to protect the American people and give them the opportunity they need to just realize their potential out there in the economy. And I think, broadly speaking, that's the agenda.
Jared, as former chief economist to former Vice President Joe Biden, what is his solution? Is it a universal income? What does it mean to have a strong federal response, given the fact that we have seen a strong federal response, enhanced unemployment benefits, a huge program to get checks out to Americans below a certain income level? What more would Biden do?
Well, first of all, let me just say the counter-cyclical response, which is what you're talking about there, is very key to what we're going through right now. But that's not a plan for the future. That's a cyclical response. What I think the next president is going to need to do is to resolve structural problems within the economy. So one of the problems, there's no one solution because there's so many different types of problems. Obviously, people need access to affordable health care, and Biden has articulated a path towards universal coverage that's very important. Probably at the top of the list now is going to be jobs. I mean, that wasn't necessarily at the top of the list when the unemployment rate was around 3%, but when it's 20%, we certainly have to talk about jobs. And there you have a very deep investment agenda, whether it's on the infrastructure side, whether it's on green technology and green jobs, or whether it's in the caring professions, critically important, health care, child care, really establishing higher quality jobs for folks in the services.
Jared, he had a long time in Washington to try and engineer those structural changes, 8 years in the Obama administration as well. And I ask this diplomatically speaking, I don't want to get too political here, but there will be some people who say he had his chance. What do you say back to that?
You have to recognize, we do have to get political here. You have to recognize that before Barack Obama was sworn in, there was literally a cabal of Republicans who were meeting to try to block every aspect of his agenda. Now, he still managed, with the help of the vice president at the time, to push back hard on the Great Recession, to establish a very important health care change that brought our uninsurance rates down by 40%. And a financial reform that I think has proved pretty durable. And that's with tremendous political blowback. Then, of course, when the Tea Party got to town, they tried to shut it down even further. So he's going to need political cooperation, and that's one reason I'm sure the Democrats are very interested in trying to get a majority in the Senate. But even amidst the kind of opposition that he and Obama faced, they actually got quite a bit done.
Jared, always great to catch up with you. You, of course, are allowed to get political. I just try and avoid it wherever I can. Jared, fantastic to hear from you.
I don't like it either, but you can't avoid it.
There. Jared, thank you. Tom, we can't avoid it on days like today, and you can't avoid it on weeks like the one we've had.
I've been a piñata recently, John. We're working at it every single day, folks, trying to do what Bloomberg's always done, which is try to take the middle road. But, John, I get the love mail and the hate mail back and forth. That's how I would describe it.
Well, I think you can believe in two things all at once. You can believe in what these protests are protesting for, and you can agree with the President and Governor Cuomo on the need for law and order. I think you can hold those two beliefs simultaneously without diminishing the former with believing the latter, Tom. We can talk about that a little bit later. Equity futures up 13 on the S&P 500. It just feels uncomfortable, doesn't it? But that's just the way it is in this equity market. Up 0.4% on the S&P 500, 30.90 on the S&P. From New York City, this is Bloomberg.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. The friction between New York Mayor Bill de Blasio and Governor Andrew Cuomo is at a new level. Yesterday, Cuomo criticized the city's handling of Monday's widespread looting and violence following protests against police brutality. According to the mayor, he says that he is angry at what Cuomo says because, according to Cuomo, the NYPD and the mayor did not do their job.
I've offered the National Guard. The mayor has said he can handle it with the NYPD. My option is to displace the mayor of New York City and bring in the National Guard as the governor in a state of emergency.
Protests were largely peaceful, and the nation's streets were calmer than they have been in days since the killing of George Floyd set off demonstrations that at times brought violence and destruction, along with pleas to stop police brutality and injustice against African Americans. As of this morning, there had been over 9,000 arrests nationwide since the unrest began following Floyd's death May 25th in Minneapolis. The Chinese city of Wuhan, where the coronavirus was first detected late last year, has tested nearly 10 million people in an unprecedented 19-day campaign to check an entire city. It identified just 300 positive cases, all of whom had no symptoms. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, this is Global News 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, makes innovation happen. NJIT faculty mentored Christoph Camacho when he was a student, helping him co-found a startup and patent a device that uses drone technology for reforestation and to collect valuable data for land management.
I founded Paratrees back in 2016, taking what I learned from my research at NJIT and migrating it to a startup. Our technology is to really enhance land management operations, so we work very closely with land management companies. So we have a drone that performs precision reforestation, and we do storm damage assessment, having access to drones that can collect data so it's much faster. And what is more important, we help them drive management decisions. NJIT has been there every step of the way, going full force with my company.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Greetings! Do you, like Sergey, get glitchy camera every time you're on the video chit-chat? Hello? Hello? Can anyone hear me? Well, you are in need of better internet. No, nobody? Oh, there we are. No. Auto Sergey checks your broadband speed and helps you look for a better deal on faster broadband. Am I frozen? Or is everyone else frozen? Oh. And he is my head of IT. Find better, faster broadband, so compare the market.
The police must stop the looting and the criminal activity. That is the essence of the police force. They are supposed to protect the community, protect the property. They did not do that in New York City last night.
From New York City, live on Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg Radio for our audience worldwide, that was New York's governor. Mr. Cuomo, referring to the events of Monday night, Tom, and he said that yesterday, and he was not referring just to the NYPD. He was talking about the management. I think we should be really clear on this specific tone of that, Tom. That was about Mayor de Blasio and how he's handled the security of this city. And I think we should be clear once again, Tom, it is not original to have tension, friction between the governor of New York and the mayor. But this one, between these two, is quite original.
Well, each city across this nation, John, has their own conversation now between the politics and enforcement. What I really watched yesterday were the comments of the police commissioner, Dermot Shea, and he was very, very defensive of Mayor de Blasio in the resources deployed, given the geography of the looting. I would urge anyone within New York or whichever city you are across this nation, get on a police scanner and see and hear the many geographies that any given police force has to face Monday night and last night, and of course we'll see what happens tonight. John, to be sure, everything went a lot smoother tonight than it did on Monday.
It seems that way, Tom. It certainly seems that way. Alongside Tom Keene, I'm Jonathan Ferro, together with Lisa Bravitz. This is Bloomberg Surveillance, getting you up to speed on the market day. A couple of hours away from the opening bell in New York, with equity futures positive 14 points on the S&P 500, up around about 0.4%. Just to whip through what's been happening over the last couple of days, the last couple of weeks for that matter, a real cyclical tilt to the moves in the equity market, with energy, the financials, industrials, materials leading some of the gains. The banks getting a lift of what's happening in the bond market, with yields higher and a curve steeper, your 10-year approaching around about 70 basis points in America in the Treasury market. And just to round things out quickly, Tom, the euro story, the equity outperformance and euro dollar pushing higher. Euro through 112, up 0.25% on the session.
First chart I looked at this morning, John, I got up at, I think it was 6:52, something like that, maybe 6:45. And when I got up, the first chart I looked at was the euro through 112. It's very linear. You really wonder the oomph that it will take to get to 113, the kind of news. John, do you see any news flow right now that could drive euro higher from Merkel, from Macron?
Just the momentum, Tom, just the momentum of the last couple of weeks, and quite clearly risk appetite has improved. And look, price action shapes narrative, and right now the price action is positive, and so is the narrative around the continent at the moment.
We welcome all of you on our simulcast, and right now Stephen Chivarone joins us. He is with Federated Hermes, and we're thrilled he could be with us because he's one of the few people I know in the allocation game that really talks the talk straight. Steve, how do I feel if I rebalanced out of Amazon, if I rebalanced out of Alphabet?
Yeah, I think you feel pretty lousy, and you know some of our thoughts on rebalancing that we've discussed over the years. Look, I think right now, we've lived through an unprecedented period, roughly of 10 years, where economic growth was low but widespread, and it allowed inflation and rates to stay down. And so the gulf between winners and losers was relatively narrow. You could own everything and be okay. That's not the world we're in right now. Right now, the difference between winners and losers are companies doubling or dying. And in that environment, you really need to do your work and be active in the way that you invest. You need to invest professionally. And it's a case where when you see a winner, you hold your winner. And I think it's a little bit of a different game now than it was pre-crisis.
Steve, that certainly has been true up until now. We see the big FANG names absolutely dominating the returns that we have seen so far. But there's been a shift recently toward the cyclicals. Yesterday, we saw an outperformance in financials, the Russell 2000. The underperformance came from the NASDAQ. How much steam do you think that this trade has?
It's a debate that we have internally. I think it has some steam. And I think what's going on is, in a very messy way, we're observing the wisdom of crowds. And you see it when you see folks shoulder to shoulder on the beach in Ocean City, Maryland, or rushing into bars in Wisconsin, or even, and I know that there's a whole lot more than this to it, but even when you see the large groups gathering for protests, what we're doing is we're pushing the limits of how hard we can reopen in ways that experts would never approve of. But it's giving us information as to how aggressive we can reopen. And the truth is that if as the economy reopens, it's reopening at 60% capacity instead of 30, for an example, that's a whole lot fewer companies that die, and that's a whole lot more people that are currently unemployed that get back to work. And so what I think the market is trying to understand is how long is this social distance purgatory? How severe is it? The period after we open, but before we get back to full capacity. And because we're pushing it so hard, and it is messy, I think we're starting to get the impression, or the market's starting to sniff out, that the reopening could be more aggressive than we originally thought. I think that's what's primarily driving the market, and cyclicals benefit from that because they're going to be where you price in that better economic activity.
You know, Steve, we talk a lot on this program about the disconnect between the brutal unemployment data and economic figures that we've been getting out, frankly, from the world, and markets that have seemed somewhat divorced from reality. But it really isn't markets as a whole. It has been the FANG names, the big tech shares that have benefited the most from this environment. It has not been the cyclicals, which have actually lagged behind and posted losses. Are we pricing in a V-shaped recovery given the rotation into cyclicals yet? Or are we still pricing in a V, a swoosh, a square root sign, whatever you want to say?
I don't think it matters. I think it is a U-shaped recovery. It's going to take us, in our estimation, until the end of 2021, until GDP levels get back to where they were at the end of 19, as an example. But if you look back at the history of markets bottom in recessions. They don't bottom after. They don't bottom when things get better. They bottom when data goes from deteriorating at its fastest rate to a slightly less fast rate. And if this recession really is the first 2 quarters of this year, well then, guess what? We're only a month away from its end. And so I think what you have to remember is a market is a series of individuals trying to get ahead of each other. Because if you get the winning trade on first, you make money when everyone else comes to that realization. And what happened here is when unemployment claims stopped rising at that high of a rate, the market bottomed. That's actually typical. It's frustrating because it's illogical, but it's typical of how markets react in recession.
Hey, Steve, always great to catch up with you, mate. Fantastic to hear from you. Steve Chevron there of Federated Hermes, portfolio manager. My best to you and the whole of the team. Tom, and that's the truth of it. The market bottoms before you see the worst of it in the data. I don't think the right question, though, is to say whether we've seen the bottom. I think the right question is whether this equity market has got too far ahead of the recovery. I think that's what we've got to explore.
The right question is to say those that are in cash have been humbled, not that John, would know anything
but I think
about
I think we're all humbled every day. I think you just a little bit more than maybe us, Tom. Humbled every single morning.
3,100 SPX, 3,100 SPX.
And solidly in cash. Congratulations. From New York City, this is Bloomberg.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong. Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777.
A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute.
If you can build that flat-pack wardrobe without looking at the instructions, you've still got it. If you can manage 5 keepy uppies on your first go, you've without question still got it. If you can toss a pancake to the ceiling and not let it hit the floor, surely you've still got it. And if you can just about fit into those jeans you bought 5 years ago, you've definitely still got it. Brute. Still got it.
Emma, the UK's most awarded mattress in 2019. Try it out for 200 nights risk-free. Made in the UK. Go to emmamattress.co.uk to order now.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance. For our audience worldwide, we're live on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tom Keene. I'm Jonathan Ferro, together with Lisa Abramovich. This is Bloomberg. 2 hours away from the opening bell. Let's get you up to speed on the price action. After 3 days of gains, we might make it 4 on the S&P 500. We advance with equity futures up 12, positive 0.4%. A nice cyclical tilt to this rally that we'll be talking about through the next several hours right here on Bloomberg. In the bond market, supporting that cyclical rally, that pickup in the financials, a steeper yield curve, and the curve steeper this morning, yields higher on a 10-year by just a basis point to 0.695%, call it 0.7. And in foreign exchange, a 5th day of weakness for the US dollar, euro dollar. What a turnaround the last couple of weeks, from 108 to 112 in around about 2 weeks. Euro dollar advancing, Tom, 0.2%. That is a weaker dollar, a stronger euro.
Well, one of the great surprises in the year, and certainly as we shift to June and on to July, the persistency of dollar weakness has really been extraordinary. We've had wonderful conversations today with economist Stephen King of HSBC joining us, the laureate Paul Romer on technology, he at New York University, and now the former president of the New York Federal Reserve System, William Dudley, and of course with a distinguished career at Goldman Sachs before that, and his service with Tim Geithner of a bit ago, a crisis ago, I guess we could say. Dr. Dudley, thank you so much for joining us today. John and I were talking about inequality, and one of the raps of any Fed is that it is monetary policy for the elite. Explain trickle-down Federal Reserve policy. How do they assist in a lesser inequality?
Well, the Fed's monetary policy tools are really about supporting economic activity and driving the economy to higher levels of employment. However, that can actually cause financial asset values to go up, and that can actually exacerbate inequality. So the Fed's choice is not have a recovery, have less inequality, or have a recovery with buoyant financial asset prices and more inequality. So the Fed's tools are just not suited to address the inequality problem.
Bill, is it that binary, or can we find a better balance?
I think it is pretty much that binary. Obviously, when we're in a crisis like this and the Fed's embarked on special facilities, the Fed could try to, undertake facilities that funnel money more to households and small businesses. But again, the Fed is, that's difficult for the Fed operationally. How does the Fed actually get money to millions and millions of households and small businesses? That's difficult to do operationally. It's much easier to intervene in the capital markets where the Fed can rely on counterparties, primary dealers, and others to essentially help the Fed buy financial assets. Much more difficult to lend on a one-by-one millions into millions of different entities. So that, again, that's a challenging thing for the Fed.
Bill, I think it is a challenging thing, but there is a broad consensus that they should be keeping financial conditions loose to help this economy pick up and recover. You'll hear very little debate about that. I think where the debate really is about how far the Federal Reserve goes when it does that. You can intervene in credit markets, okay, might be a debate there as well, but you can help, say, big companies issue debt to keep people on the payroll. But when you start to go into junk, you do run the risk of getting the accusation that you are helping those who made risky bets in this market, and the likelihood that that actually spills over to the broader economy is relatively small. Bill, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how do you know when you've done too much?
Well, I think the Fed's focus has been on basically making sure that financial markets work well so people can have access to the markets, and that's really the reason for the interventions. I mean, even their intervention into the high-yield debt market, it's not so much to bail out individual borrowers, but to make sure that people actually can access that market and raise high-yield debt. And I think they've been quite successful in those efforts. But you raise an important point. People who have high-yield debt outstanding, a lot of times that's happened by choice. And so for the Federal Reserve to intervene and support those asset prices is basically creating a little bit of moral hazard in the sense that you're encouraging people to take on more debt.
So let's talk about the moral hazard and broaden out the implications of this period of time. There have been some analysts who say the reason why the Federal Reserve really, I don't want to say had to, but in some ways had to step into the corporate debt market was because of the expansion of the shadow banking system. In some ways, they were bailing out the shadow banking sector rather than the banking sector, which was actually well capitalized. How important, in your view, is it to set regulatory standards for the shadow banking sector that are sort of more similar to what we see on Wall Street following this, given the fact that perhaps this can be viewed as they're having the systemic import of Wall Street of the past?
I think you raise a very important point. If something is systemic, that's then going to require the central bank to intervene in an unusual way in the middle of a crisis. If it's systemic, then it needs to be regulated to some degree. And so we had a number of players in this last few months that have essentially been bailed out by the Fed. People who, hedge funds that were invested in cash treasuries and short treasury futures. The Fed, basically, their treasury purchases were helping those entities unwind what turned out to be a bad trade. If people become very leveraged and they're big enough to be systemic, then I think there needs to be some regulation to reel that in.
What kind of regulation could the Fed push and frankly push for from other government agencies that you think would be appropriate from the hedge funds, from private equity, from some of the investment firms that have benefited from the Fed's programs and will probably continue to based on what they have pledged going forward?
Well, one thing the Fed could do is basically say, look, you're lending to these hedge funds, you're doing repo with these hedge funds. There's got to be a limit on how much leverage you give them. So that'd be one thing. Another thing would be mutual funds. We have mutual funds that have overnight liquidity that are invested in very illiquid assets. The SEC could change that and say if you're a mutual fund invested in really liquid assets, you can't offer overnight liquidity. You have to offer monthly liquidity, and that would also reduce the risk of a fire sale of assets. What the Fed really wants to avoid in these kind of episodes is where people have to dump lots of assets into the market and there's no buyers, and that then distorts markets significantly. One way to avoid that is to make sure that people actually have access to liquidity. Another thing the Fed could do is basically say, look, you have to buy liquidity insurance from the Fed during peacetime, so it's available during wartime. So there's a number of things that I think are worth exploring because it's one thing if you have a financial crisis every 50, 100 years. If you start to have a financial crisis every 10 years, then the Fed's actions are going to encourage people to take more risk in the future.
Long ago and far away, Bill Dudley, you and the great Ed McKelvey wrote a chapter for me on our fiscal position. And you said, off of Patrick O'Brien, that there was not a moment to lose. When is our moment not to lose with $9 trillion of presumed balance sheet? When is that moment out in the distant future?
Well, what's changed, obviously, is that the level of interest rates has come down dramatically. So although we've had this explosion in federal debt service costs have stayed very, very, very subdued. I mean, I think we've had more than a tripling of debt outstanding over the last 10 years or so. yet the debt service costs have barely moved upward. So I think, what happens to interest rates are going to be critical in terms of when the federal debt burden becomes important. It's not going to be a problem in the next year or two, but looking out further down the road, I think there will be some consequences to having such a large increase in federal debt.
Bill, what are your thoughts on how much we're monetizing the Treasury deficit at the moment?
Well, we're not monetizing it in the sense that the Fed isn't actually buying, primary issuance of treasuries, but we are monetizing it in the sense that the Fed's intervening in the secondary market and expanding its balance sheet quite sharply. I mean, the Fed's balance sheet now is up to $7 trillion. It's gone up by more than $3 trillion just in the last 3 months. So the balance sheet is rising very, very rapidly. There's no limit to how big the Fed's balance sheet can get, but you have to understand that there are some risks there for the Fed. I mean, the Fed is basically taking on quite a bit of interest rate risk, right? Because most of its liabilities are reserves, which are overnight, and a lot of its assets are longer duration assets. So the Fed actually has an interest rate risk exposure that doesn't get talked about very much.
Bill Dudley, we'll have to get you back to talk about it once more. Bill Dudley there, the former New York Fed president, on a situation in the Treasury market and on the inequality coming around from the Federal Reserve's unprecedented intervention in the last couple of months, Tom. Just on the final point, I think there'll be some pushback there, no doubt, Tom, about whether the Fed is monetizing what the Treasury is issuing. I understand they're buying in the secondary market, but quite clearly they're sucking up a tremendous amount of the supply.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Dr. Dudley, as you would expect as a former Fed official, did a nice job of finessing that rude question of yours. John, what I did this morning, John, speaking of low rates, is I went to the famous Bloomberg yield analysis function, the YA function, and I looked at the 3-year Amazon piece, and the yield to Bezos was 0.44% or something like that. It's amazing to see where interest rates are.
40 basis points on 3-year notes, Lisa, of Amazon, not the government, of Amazon. And that makes it really difficult. The financial repression that we talked about 10 years ago and for the next 10 years, we're doing it all over again. What's the incentive to buy corporate credit at 40 basis points? You were just pushed to take more risk, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, the incentive right now is where else are you going to get yield given the fact that the Fed is buying so much of the treasuries? And it's not just Amazon. Corporate borrowing costs within spitting distance of record lows.
Corporate borrowing costs within spitting distance of record lows. To be clear here, Lisa, that's the absolute yield. That's not the spread.
That's the absolute yield for investment-grade corporate debt, 2.36% versus the all-time low of 2.22%.
John, we don't do spreads on simulcasts.
We don't do spreads.
Too much. You could do spreads on real yield. We do spreads on real yield.
Real yield's been off for so long. When am I allowed to bring real yield back so that we can cover spreads? Do we have an answer on that yet, Tom?
Under negotiation, that's all I know. No, we don't have an answer.
Are you the guy that shut Bloomberg real yield down? Was it you that made sure that we shut that show down? You're the guy. So should I tell everyone to send their emails to you to bring that show back?
Yes.
We're getting bushels of emails, particularly from Indiana. It's remarkable the number of emails from Indiana. Bring back real yield.
Counting you down to the opening bell this morning. Good morning to you all. You know who to send your emails to. If you reach out, I'll send you his email address. Looking ahead of that, equity futures with a pickup. Just the compare and contrast of this country absolutely shaken to its core by the unrest of the last week or so in this equity market that keeps drifting higher. S&P 500 futures, 30.89, up 12 points, positive 0.4%. And we look on course for another morning of gains. This is Bloomberg.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, thank you very much. Protests were largely peaceful and the nation's streets were calmer than they have been in days since the killing of George Floyd set off nationwide demonstrations. In New York City, protests last night were much calmer than in recent nights after an 8 p.m. curfew was put in place. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio said there were a few looters in the city yesterday out of thousands of lawful demonstrations.
Unquestionably, it has been a tough few days, and this early curfew has made a big difference. Everywhere I'm going, streets are much more empty, huge amount of NYPD presence. We have Uber and Lyft and Via closed down because, bluntly, looters were using them. We've limited traffic below 96th Street in Manhattan to knock the looters off their game.
Mayor Bill de Blasio late last night. Iran's supreme leader has assailed Washington in the wake of George Floyd's killing for policies when it comes to upholding human rights. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei claimed in America, and this is a quote, they kill people in an open crime and they do not offer an apology while claiming to support human rights. Iowa Republican voters ousted controversial Representative Steve King in the state's primary yesterday. The 9-term congressman defeated by conservative state senator Randy Feenstra. King has faced a backlash from supporters and his own party after comments he made about white supremacy. Feenstra will face Democrat J.D. Scholten. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, this is Global News 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. With the Bloomberg Business of Sports Report, I'm Michael Barr. Investors and fans of the now-defunct Arena Football League have a chance to get their hands on everything from team memorabilia to intellectual property as the bankrupt organization's assets hit the auction block. GA Global Partners has started taking bids on AFL assets ranging from team logos to trophies, signs, and game uniforms. The Arena Football League ceased operations last year and in November filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Formula One will finally get underway with back-to-back races at the Austrian Grand Prix in July as part of an 8-race European swing. The Red Bull Ring in Spielberg will host races on July 5th and 12th. The next race will be in Hungary on July 19th, followed by consecutive races at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone on August 12th and 9th. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports Report. I'm Michael Barr, brought to you by Grainger, offering supplies and solutions for every industry. Visit Grainger.com.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus symptoms and testing. If you have any one of the following symptoms, a high temperature, a new continuous cough, loss of taste or smell, you can now get tested. Do not leave home for any reason other than to get tested. Find out how to get a test and how long to isolate at nhs.uk/coronavirus. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to stand out stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, pass to the 5, touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
Our country is crying out for leadership. leadership that can unite us, leadership that brings us together, leadership that can recognize pain and deep grief of communities that have had a knee on their neck for a long time.
Former Vice President Joe Biden there, weighing in on the tension in this country over the last week or so and positioning himself, Tom, quite clearly to be that leader come November. You can see this has quickly become one of the big issues ahead of the general election just several months away.
The politics is just absolutely extraordinary, John. I know we want to get to a market check here, and it's really quite good markets today. But the market, John, of our politics is always a market of the labor economy. And I really want to emphasize, John, the overlay of this pandemic with a crashed labor economy buttressed up against what we observed in Minnesota just simply is that toxic chemistry that leads to the difficult moment we're in.
ADP report under 30 minutes away. We will bring that to you right here on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio ahead of the jobs report this coming Friday. Let's get you up to speed on the price action, shall we? 1 hour and 42 minutes away from the opening bell in New York City. Here's your price action. Equities higher by around about 13 points on the S&P. We advanced by 0.4%. Outside of the equity market after several days of gains in the bond market, curve steeper, yields higher on the 10-year by a single basis point, on the 30-year out through 150 now. That has given the banks a really nice lift over the last several days, and I think we've beaten this one so hard over the last several weeks. Euro dollar advancing up 0.2% from 108 through 112. But the big turnaround, Tom, is just the improvement in risk appetite and how sharply it contrasts with the devastation we see around us, both in terms of the social unrest and the labour market as well. But let's be clear on a couple of things. You see this time and time again. We saw it in the protests of the 1960s. I'm not sure if that's a good parallel. We can talk about that later in the programme. And you often see a market that bottoms well before you see the worst of it in the economic data. We still haven't seen the worst of the data. We're likely to see that on Friday, Tom. But I think the question we've got to grapple with as we reopen, and as these protests continue, and quite clearly no one is thinking about social distancing anymore, every day that goes by, every single day that goes by, and if we have no sign of a second wave of infections or a pickup of infections, you will see more people more encouraged about how quickly this economy can normalise, Tom.
It is going to be fascinating, and what we're trying to do, folks, is bring you a varied set of conversations with people with experience. And not in Washington, but in New York, but in an always diverse and interesting Philadelphia is a gentleman that we'll go to here in a moment. We're trying to work that technical arrangement up right now. And John, what is so important to me in all these conversations that we're having is this simple idea of this labor economy. It is absolutely untenable, John, that we can have an unemployment rate of 18%, or maybe it's going to be 22%. I'll let you decide. And if we make it halfway back, it's still untenable.
And a double-digit unemployment rate is totally untenable. And I think on Wall Street, clearly, not much is going to change. There will be a focus on the aggregate number for the economy in the United States of America. Lisa, I think the focus for policymakers increasingly has to be on the disparity beneath the numbers we look at on Friday when we get the payrolls report, beneath the numbers we look at every single month, every single year. Get beyond the aggregate figure and look at the disparity beneath. And that explains a story of a community that has been disproportionately hit by the economic effects of this pandemic and the health effects as well.
Yeah, you see this in Black and Hispanic communities that saw 20% fewer jobs in April than 2 months earlier, seeing the brunt of the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic and much deeper job losses than among white Americans. The question is, what can be done to remedy this? How quickly can this be addressed at a time when people are concerned about a summer of discontent that will have ramifications that I have not heard, John? And this, to me, is really a question, one of my main questions over the next few weeks. I have not heard what exactly this will do to the economy going forward, John.
Well, Lisa, it's got to come from the fiscal side. And what we've seen over the last several weeks, and Tom, you and I have talked about it, the collective will seems to have faded over the last several weeks as the focus has shifted to reopening the economies. The collective will to do more on the fiscal side has faded. And I'd like to see a renewed effort on that front in the months to come, especially when some of these enhanced unemployment benefits begin to fade out.
That may be, John, for this Wednesday. Remember, the day is young. For you and me, we're halfway through it. I'm about halfway to the surveillance nap, folks. But you really wonder, John, if this is the Wednesday where we begin to see a new impulse of fiscal thinking down in Washington. And, of course, buttressed up against that will be the international economics that the president faces. There's no one at Bloomberg who looks at the pulse of the international economics, and really an economics that's done better in the last number of weeks than our Damian Sassower, and he joins us as well. Damian, the American political crisis and the American employment crisis seem separate from Brazil or Singapore or Eastern Europe, but it's not, is it?
No, it's not at all, Tom. And I mean, look, there's a lot of similarities between what we're witnessing here in the U.S. and many of the things we're witnessing across the whole of emerging markets. And, I've mentioned previously on the show, as you know, I've talked about Arab Spring risk, the fact that this turmoil kind of spills over into the streets, into the main street and into the real economy. And we're not just seeing that here in the U.S. We're seeing that in places like Brazil and Chile and others. And so, this is something that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. It's impacting valuations across the whole of my market.
Damian, I'm curious about the perception of the United States amid the domestic unrest in places like China and how that could affect policy, given the fact that Beijing is using these images as propaganda to try to cull popular support in that nation.
Well, there's no question, nationalist fervor in China is very high. And that's something that certainly is alarming from the perspective of a U.S. dollar investor, I guess, if you want to call it that, or maybe a U.S.-centric investor. But really, at the end of the day, this is nothing new, and it's certainly, nothing new for emerging market practitioners, because as goes China, so go, the rest of the market. Now that the euro appears to be stabilizing here, it's a really key factor, as I'm not saying it's derailing this concept of U.S. dollar exceptionalism, but it's certainly giving cause for thought, and I think that's a real big, it's a real big change here as we enter into the summer months when liquidity dries up.
Hey, Damien, always great to get your thoughts on a show. Thanks for dropping by, especially the last minute as well on this equity market and emerging markets too. Damien Sassower there of Bloomberg Intelligence. Much debate about what's happening in the FX market. Is the weaker dollar a symptom of improving risk appetite or a driver of it? Tom, I'd suggest it was the former and not the latter. It feels like it's a symptom of the improving risk appetite. There was huge haven demand for the US dollar over the last several months, and quite clearly we're just chipping away at that every single day.
I agree. It's a convexity roll-off is what the pros call it. We're rolling off that huge bet that was made on safe haven. But I must admit, John, in the last 24, 30 hours, to Damian's world, there's been a very nice correlation between weaker safe havens and all this asset lift that we're seeing.
Just feels like a huge positioning squeeze across a range of assets over the last several weeks. We'll continue the conversation with a more conservative Tobias Lefkovich of Citigroup. The chief U.S. equity strategist joins us next right here on Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg Radio.
Have you wanted to speak a new...
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
This is Mike Golick from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Trey Wingo, my son, and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
He does! Fabry wins it!
To standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
Are you ready for the realest first-hand take of what's happening in the NBA? On their podcast, All the Smoke, former NBA players Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson bring their fiery intensity to the mic, dishing on the latest news and drama from on and off the court without boundaries.
Half man, half amazing. My friend, our brother, Vince Carter, man, welcome to the show.
Yo, what's up, man?
What's up, my brother?
Man,
Search All the Smoke on TuneIn to listen.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game, from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
First time.
We always talk about the losers in a trade war.
You benefit if you're just further away from China.
So that you can too.
What are the ramifications if she crumbles or doesn't crumble?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military.
The country is crying out for leadership. Leadership that can unite us. Leadership that brings us together.
The defense tools are just not suited to address the inequality problem.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrell, and Lisa Abramowitz.
Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, and Tom Keene, our simulcast on Bloomberg Television across this nation and worldwide, and on Bloomberg Radio. We particularly say good morning to the hundreds of thousands of you listening at home, still sequestered within this pandemic. The news flow, extraordinary. The news flow, as you just heard from the president and from Vice President Biden, is clearly political. We'll touch on that in a moment with our Kevin Cirilli. And then Tobias Lefkovich will join us from Citigroup on these extraordinary markets. John, we can talk about the politics of the moment, the relative calm of last night, but I really think I've got to go to the clarion call in 15 minutes of the first of the May labor reports, the ADP report. John, how do you link this Wednesday report into what we're going to observe Friday of an American jobs depression?
Well, to keep it simple, Tom, ugly. The numbers will be ugly. They'll be ugly in a little bit later this morning. They'll be ugly again on Friday morning when we see an unemployment rate pushing 20%. But quite clearly, this market is focusing on the aggregate numbers in the future and hoping that in the future, the outlook gets better as the year grows older, and many people agree with that. The degree to which things improve, I think that is where we should have some real debate. But beneath the aggregate numbers, the disparity. It is the social unrest that speaks to the disparity on a range of issues, not just on social justice, but also on the unemployment and the disproportionate hit that we've seen to particular communities off the back of this pandemic as well, Tom.
Well, I mean, Lisa, there's no question about this, that we can directly link in what we talk about on this simulcast with the politics of the moment. I'll say this, folks, I have personally lost perspective on just tossing off a mint, Lisa, like 18% unemployment. That impact on society is incalculable.
Well, and the impact is much greater on specific societies. To John's point, this idea that Fed Chair Jay Powell said that 40% of individuals earning less than $40,000 have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. And you take a look at Black and Latino communities hit well harder than white communities, and those who earn less getting laid off and losing their money faster. You have to wonder how long this can persist. And it is not that surprising, Tom, that we're seeing such a huge wave of unrest at a time of such growing disparity.
Let's get started here, folks. Again, we're thrilled you could join us on radio and television. John, why don't you bring in Kevin Cirilli with your observations, Jonathan Farrell, on last evening in this New York?
Well, I hope that things are getting better. And Kevin, I wonder if they share that hope in Washington, because the peaceful protests in the daytime have been drowned out by the noise of the riots overnight. Did we finally break that pattern overnight Tuesday night into Wednesday morning?
Yes, we did. And look, I mean, the curfew here in the nation's capital, Jonathan, was 7 p.m. Eastern, and the protests continued well into the night. Hundreds, if not more than 1,000 protesters gathering in Lafayette Square, which is right outside of the White House, and as well as on the steps, or not on the steps, on the National Mall. There were National Guard members and military personnel who were on the steps of the historic Lincoln Memorial Monument. All of this is helicopters patrolling the city. All of this really, it's tough to find the words in terms of the historic moment we find ourselves in. This hasn't been seen since the 1960s. But I will say this. I think we have to take a step back here and as we look at the political ramifications of this, because this remains an incredibly polarized political time. And I spoke with a senior source on the president's reelection campaign, and they are adamant that they are going to double down on the issue of law and order. They feel that in battleground states like Michigan and Wisconsin, that will play well for them in suburbs as well as more rural parts of the community. In contrast, when I speak with my Democratic sources, they say that the Biden campaign is going to try to continue to reestablish and reconnect the Obama coalition that, quite frankly, fell apart during Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign.
Kevin, and to everyone who's listening, I mean, this has been an incredibly difficult period of time for so many people. I see it in my kids. Yes. I see it in my friends' kids. And I'm trying to figure out where the leadership will come from to give a sense of unity and a sense of healing. President Trump today does not have anything that we know of just yet on his schedule. What are you expecting to hear from President Trump in order to give some sort of leadership message to a country very much in pain?
Lisa, I hear you. I mean, 1,000% I hear you. And it's a totally fair question. I mean, the president is, again, though, they view this as doubling down on law and order. And here's why. Because I think, unless the political reality outside of your window, outside of someone's window, is very different than the political reality outside of a farmer in Iowa. And so they're watching this on the news while people in the cities are literally living this in real time. And that contrast, politically speaking, is why you're noticing such a divide. The president was never going to win New York City. The president was never going to win Washington, D.C. And so, unfortunately, that's the political reality. Now, in terms of policy, I can tell you this, that at the end of June or early July, there is that anticipation for another round of economic stimulus. And I'm very hard-pressed to find any Republican even who feels that in the next round of economic stimulus, some type of policy, structural policy change would not be included in that bill.
Kevin Cirilli, thank you so much, our chief Washington correspondent. John, I am thunderstruck that we really don't know at this hour, 8:03 a.m., I'm going to call it, in Wall Street time, New York time, and Trump time, that we really don't know the president's schedule today. I'll be honest, John, I find that remarkable.
A little bit later, of course, Tom, hopefully we hear from the President of the United States. To go back to the fiscal debate, Senator Pat Toomey speaking to Fox Business this morning, saying that perhaps another relief bill won't be needed if we can reopen this economy. And this speaks to something that I know Mohammed Al-Arian is concerned about as well, that we win the war but don't secure the peace. And I just wonder if that's something we hear a little bit more about in the months to come.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, John. That really shows just some of the disparities that we see in Washington. The backdrop for all of this, folks, is an extraordinary market. We talked to the technician, Chris Verone, earlier about the one-way move on small caps, the one-way move on equities. Someone of great extinction, Tobias Lefkovich of Citigroup, has been watching carefully, and he joins us now. Tobias, can you be a buyer of stocks on this beautiful Wednesday morning?
It's a little bit more troublesome at these levels, and markets have come back pretty sharply on legitimate reasons, including tremendous stimulus both from the Federal Reserve as well as from the Feds or from the government through the CARES Act particularly. But we've also seen the reopening of the economy. We've seen better news on the healthcare front in terms of less hospitalizations, less deaths, or more better treatments, hopes on vaccines. All that is fine. And what I call FOMO has kind of played in, which is institutional investors' fear of missing, or not out, but rather fear of meaningfully underperforming. So as markets go up, they have to participate, and everybody focuses on the technicals as opposed to some of the fundamentals. For example, how's the unemployment issues going to play out over the next 6-9 months? It is going to be a more difficult economic period.
Tobias, you touched on something really important. We see a price move, and there's always a temptation to find this neat fundamental narrative that fits it. Are you saying this is just very technical? It's a position squeeze, it's momentum, it's the fear of missing out, the fear of underperforming, as you've put it as well?
So, look, I think, again, there are some true fundamental backdrops to it. I think probably the best argument I have heard from investors is that companies are making structural change. They're learning how to work through the pandemic-induced virtual reality that we're kind of enduring. Over 2.5 months, companies have really sought out the efficiencies, and they're reacting to it. So there are going to be some structural changes that therefore provide better margin opportunity for the companies on the outside. But the problem is that those structural efficiencies also mean those jobs don't come back as quickly. It creates kind of a demand problem. Look, we think the 40 million numbers are too high in terms of the reported claims, simply because there's a number of duplication. People who had signed up weren't sure if they had signed up correctly, submitted another claim, and you're seeing certain states coming out and telling you they're duplicates. So maybe let's say the number's 30 million, 32 million, and let's even say half of those people can get back their jobs by year end. That's still another 16 million people who don't have their jobs. And it's going to be problematic in terms of top line activity for corporations. There are certain industries that are enduring this extraordinarily well, and there are certain ones that are far more damaged, because what's really happened is the pandemic has accelerated certain trends that were kind of already underway. So the demise of brick and mortar retail has increased rapidly. The trend towards telemedicine has also increased the other way very significantly. So those are some of the things that are changing secularly. But again, I think companies have really learned how to work through this, and it is a proper argument. The question is the market moved too much? And our sense from our panic euphoria model, which is now flashing euphoria again, is suggesting almost an 80% probability that markets will be down in the subsequent 12 months as opposed to up.
Tobias, look forward to getting you back on the program soon. Tobias Lefkovich there of Citi. Lisa, can you imagine that? An unemployment rate this Friday that could be close to 20%, and Citi's work pointing to euphoria being back in this market. That is quite a contrast.
Yeah, and it's very uncomfortable, as you have continually said, and it really goes back to the conversation that we had with former New York Fed President Bill Dudley. What is the moral hazard being baked into this market? How will it be viewed politically at a time of just incredible disparity, not only economically, but also with markets and reality, John?
And no sign right now the Fed cares about the moral hazard either. A little bit later this morning, we'll be catching up with David Malpass of the World Bank president, joining us on this program live on Bloomberg TV and radio at 8:30 Eastern. He'll be joining us in 20 minutes' time. Equity futures higher, up by 16 points. We're positive 0.5% of the S&P 500. This is Bloomberg.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, thank you very much. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot called for unity in the wake of the unrest that rocked the city after George Floyd's death. In a special address last night, Lightfoot reflected on how the impact has reverberated across the country.
To the thousands of people here in Chicago and across the country who engaged in peaceful, nonviolent protests for change, I stand with you.
The mayor also announced she has given orders to the police superintendent to implement new reforms to enhance community policing. The state of Minnesota has filed a civil rights charge against the Minneapolis Police Department in the wake of George Floyd's death. Democratic Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, says he knows the community of Minnesota is looking for his administration to take action.
Minnesotans, you can expect our administration to use every tool at our disposal to try and deconstruct systemic racism that is generations deep. And as we move forward, we're going to need to do it with the community. But I think the thing I'm hearing from the protesters is we're not watching and we don't care what you say. We care what you do.
Will the Republican convention go forward in Charlotte, North Carolina in late summer? President Trump on Twitter late last night said the GOP is looking for a new state to host the convention in August. Yesterday, North Carolina's Democratic Governor Roy Cooper said in a letter to the RNC, quote, planning for a scaled-down convention with fewer people, social distancing, and face coverings is a necessity. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, this is Global News 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
President of the Jewish Communal Fund, Zoya Raines, and her husband Robert Friedman, Jewish activists and philanthropists, talk about why they chose the Jewish Communal Fund for their charitable giving.
As very busy working parents, we wanted to focus more on the charity part of it and wanted to focus more on our children and less on the administration.
The Jewish Communal Fund is one of the oldest and largest donor-advised funds, but at the same time, they're totally up to date and have state-of-the-art systems for us to access and manage our contributions online. The assets in our fund at the JCF grow tax-free, so we can generate more charitable dollars to support the charities that we care about most.
Let JCF minimize your taxes and maximize your charitable giving.
We're incredibly passionate about our charity, and the JCF allows us to focus more on the charity and less on the administration and the headaches.
For more information about Jewish Communal Fund, visit our website at jcfny.org and request a new fund kit.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and to finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Influential conversation.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
This is a message from the government about the next stage of controlling coronavirus with NHS Test and Trace. To protect your friends and family, testing and tracing must become a new way of life. If you have symptoms, you need to get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we will contact you to trace people who you might have infected. From now on, if you're told you've been exposed to an infected person, you must self-isolate for 14 days. Play your part and do the right thing so we can safely return to a more normal life. Go to nhs.uk or call 119. Stay alert, control the virus, save lives.
Get your cook on with Asda, with Uncle Ben's rice 250 grams for just £1. And our Butcher's Selection chicken breast fillets only £3.40 for 650 grams. Why not whack it in the wok? At Asda, we're committed to low prices every day on the quality products you need. Asda. Selected stores and lines subject to availability.
Looking to freshen up your listening on TuneIn? Head to the homepage to discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage.
The political risk environment usually comes from the rest of the world. But this year, it's actually the feeling that the system is so badly rigged against disenfranchised white working and middle class, against African Americans facing systemic police abuse, and that is a real concern this year.
Ian Bremmer of the Eurasia Group on the concerns that we all have worldwide, particularly here in the United States at the moment as well. Disparity is a word you will hear a lot about in the coming months. The disparity beneath the headline numbers we talk about every single day, including the numbers in this labour market. The ADP report coming out just moments ago, Tom, better than expected. The print, negative 2.76 million. We were looking for negative 9 million. I don't know how you come up with an estimate with numbers this big, but it's just going to point towards the narrative and fuel the narrative, actually, that the worst of it's behind us, that maybe things improve from here. And I believe that's the consensus position. I think the debate we should be having is the degree to which things improve in the months ahead, not just the direction.
Yeah, I'll let everybody do the alphabet soup. I've always sort of been tired by the V-shaped recovery stuff. I think as Dr. Bremer was mentioning there, the impact on society, John, is huge. And, you know, you say to yourself, what do we need to get back to, whether it's 18% or 19%? Maybe we come in with 16% peak unemployment. I would suggest there can be no social calm across the wage structure of America until you get back to 6 or 7% unemployment. Are we going to do that in 2020?
We've had guests on this programme talking about double-digit employment out to the start of 2021, 10% there and thereabouts, even as we start a new year, Tom, and that just is not good enough. Alongside Tom Keane, I'm Jonathan Ferro, together with Lisa Brabitz. You are listening to Bloomberg Surveillance live on Bloomberg TV and, of course, on Bloomberg Radio as well. In this equity market, we pick up ahead of the opening bell, 1 hour and around about 10 minutes away. Equity futures with just a little bit of a lift on the S&P 500. Session high up 18 points, positive 0.6%. In the bond market, I know Lisa looking at this one, the curve just a little bit steeper, yields a little bit higher, up 2 basis points on a 10-year to 0.7%. And in the commodity market, what a story over the last couple of months or so, Tom. The recovery of crude, $36.60 on WTI, on Brent, just south of $40 with the focus on OPEC Plus's next move.
That $40 print that we saw, I believe it was this morning, maybe we saw it late yesterday as well. That brings us to Julian Lee. What's great about Julian Lee writing for Bloomberg Opinion is not only his acuity of writing on the hydrocarbon markets, but doing it with a terrific mathematical background. When I say the dynamics of oil, Julian Lee gets that. Julian, the dynamics of this price recovery, was it the dynamics of supply or the dynamics of demand?
I think, Tom, that it was probably a bit of both. We've certainly seen that the demand collapse seems to have bottomed out. The deepest year-on-year demand destruction seems to have been the early part of April worldwide. Demand is picking up, not yet very strongly and not yet everywhere. But we do seem to be coming back off the bottom. China is picking up very strongly, other parts of the world much less so. But we've also had a huge adjustment on the supply side. The OPEC Plus group of countries that met in April, they agreed an output cut of close to 10 million barrels a day between them. We've seen big market-related reductions in output from North America, particularly the US and Canada. We've seen reductions in places like Brazil, the UK, Norway, and elsewhere. And it's really the intersection of both of those that have first put a floor under prices and then powered this rebound. The worry that some have at the moment, though, is that it may have gone too far too fast.
Well, Julian, to that point of going too far, the higher prices go, the more production comes back online. We are hearing about this anecdotally from the U.S. shale patch. And now the OPEC Plus meeting that was planned for this week will likely be canceled because of concerns about quota cheating. How much is production picking up as some of these suppliers take a look at the higher prices?
Well, I think it is, as you say, at the moment, very much anecdotal evidence coming out of the US, a number of companies operating in the shale patch saying that they are starting to reactivate some of the wells that they shut down. People aren't yet talking about doing new drilling and new fracking. This is very much reactivating wells that were pumping and that were shut down in the depths of the crisis. So the rebound is likely to be relatively small, and it may still be offset by the natural decline in older or in wells that have been brought on stream in the shale patch in the last 3 or 4 months, where production rates will still be falling. Among the OPEC countries, the real stumbling block seems to be that the Saudis and the Russians, who have both made very, very deep output cuts, are angry at countries like Iraq and Nigeria that seem to have done much less than they had promised to do, and that is certainly causing disagreements within the group. They were due to, well, they still are due to meet next week. There was talk of bringing that meeting forward till tomorrow. As it stands right at this moment, when this meeting will be held is still far from certain.
Julian, just to build on Lisa's question, just how elastic is US supply?
I think it's probably less elastic than a lot of people tend to think. Certainly wells can be shut in and restarted as we're seeing, but I think it takes more of an increase in prices than we've had already before people start looking at drilling new wells or spending the money to fracture wells that have already been drilled but not brought into production. Certainly it's much more elastic than, for example, bringing on a new oil field in the deep waters off West Africa, which, you know, can take 5 years from discovery to first production. But even so, I think we are looking at perhaps another $20 a barrel on prices before we start to see a real uptick in drilling in the shale patch, and that may well be a way off still.
Bloomberg's Julian Lee on the oil patch, on the oil market, with Brent coming in 0.7% and WTI just a little lighter. We shaved 0.2% off the price. We traded $36 and around about 75 cents. Tom, we've reflected on this a few times, policy mistakes worldwide in the last several months, and I keep going back to this because it is insane. What on earth was Saudi Arabia thinking, along with Russia, in early March to start a price war when demand was absolutely collapsing?
I just think you're dead on, John, and I guess they've had a reaffirmation of their discipline that they want now on these shattered markets. But again, just the damage they did with that decision to their own economies has been just extraordinary. I know Mr. Putin's ratings have fallen off here in the recent months.
Another chapter for Mr. Yergin if he wants to rewrite the book anytime soon. Absolutely.
Exactly.
From New York City this morning, the conversation continues. We'll catch up with David Malpass, the president of the World Bank, next on Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg Radio.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know, with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management.
Management. I'm Steve Meyer, President, Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential and change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stock future. You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
Emma, the UK's most awarded mattress in 2019. Try it out for 200 nights risk-free. Made in the UK. Go to emmamattress.co.uk to order now.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Hairbands to kids.
Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs. Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance. For our audience worldwide, we're live on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tom Keene. I'm Jonathan Ferro, together with Lisa Brabbits, getting you in shape for the opening bell 60 minutes away in New York with an ADP jobs report that knocks it out the park, a massive beat. Don't get me wrong, the numbers are still absolutely ugly, but you know the Wall Street game as well as I do. It's always about the number relative to expectations. The number ugly at negative 2.76 million, but relative to an expectation of a median estimate, Tom, of negative 9 million on the ADP report and negative 8 going forward to payrolls Friday. That's a massive beat.
It is a massive beat, John, and firming up. I know you're going to do a market check here, but it's amazing. I'm going to steal some of Lisa Bramowitz's thunder. I can do this, folks, on the Bloomberg terminal, and it's real simple. The difference in yield between the 5-year and the 30-year piece is really back to some renewed steepness. John, I've never looked at that spread in my life.
Why not, Tom? Why not? A lot of people do. Lisa Abramowitz looks at it every single morning. It's not just 530s, it's 230s. The front end and the belly of the curve really anchored by the Fed, Lisa, and yields at the longer end just starting to drift out as we reopen this economy.
Yeah, and the question I have is how much is this due to the increasing deficit, the fact that the U.S. is selling more debt, raising questions about demand, and how much is this pricing in a faster than expected recovery? One thing I'm looking for tomorrow in the initial claims, John, is we've seen this trending lower in the number of individuals who are on unemployment insurance, and we are expecting that number to continue to go down tomorrow, perhaps giving a sense of an ongoing recovery.
Yeah, Lisa, we saw it last week, and I think that's something we need to continue seeing. A theme on this programme that we've gone back and forth on over the last several weeks is quite clearly you will get some sequential improvement as we go from shutdown to reopening. We've got to ask, though, where the positive surprises are going to come from. Of course things will improve as you go from shutdown to reopen, but to the degree to which they will improve is where the debate should really be, and the limits of the overall recovery, Tom. And I know I sound like a broken record bringing this up every single day, but that is it. It is simple as that. As you reopen, how quickly can we normalise, and what are the limits of the recovery of that normalisation through the next 12 months?
Well, the next 12 months, I would suggest, John, we've got to get out the next 90 days. All of us are urging stores to open, the battle over the lockdown and being sequestered and all that. But I don't really have a one-year view, John, and I think most of our viewers, most of our listeners don't either. We're sort of like, where are we in August? I mean, to me, that's sort of the tone as well. Let's do this, John. We've got a busy morning ahead of us, and we've been able to crowbar a few minutes of his time. Joining us now, the president of the World Bank, David Malpass, of course, definitive at Bear Stearns for years in economics and assisting President Trump on his economics at Treasury, and now spearheading the effort at the World Bank. We spoke to him recently. We get an update from David Malpass today. David, there is a clarion call worldwide to spend money to put people to work. How will the World Bank affect that policy?
Hi, Tom. Good morning. The World Bank is adding resources where it can, and also targeting the resources to where the most impact can be felt. For some countries, that means supporting core businesses, either in the public sector or the private sector. Ones that, if they stopped operation, it would be giantly harmful. But in many countries, the focus is also on getting cash to people, either through a social safety net or through in-kind transfers. We're dealing with countries that are often on the brink of extreme poverty for tens of millions of people. So that's the focus right now, quickly moving on both the health crisis and the alleviation of poverty, setting up systems that will work into the future. One of the interesting things that's happening is the differentiation of countries. What financial markets are doing is, in effect, looking at some and saying they're going to be able to move forward with the policies that they've got or that they'll be able to put in place. And so that becomes a powerful positive force.
Right. What is the constraints you have? I mean, our Eric Martin writes encyclopedic on the World Bank, and he's looking at your credit rating and some of the financial ratios of the World Bank. But I want to know, David Malpass, what's the day-to-day constraint to deploying money to those very poor countries?
Yes. Well, we're in a better position because of a recent capital increase in both IBRD and IFC, two of the big parts of the bank, and a large replenishment of the of IDA that was done in December. And so by chance, by coincidence, by good fortune, the bank has resources. And so the constraint, we are planning to deploy $160 billion over the next 15 months. That sounds small by what's going on in developed countries, but if you think about the developing countries, these are large-scale resources, very welcome by the countries, and so the constraint, the challenge is to not go over exposure limits for individual countries. Some countries are at their credit limits. Let's think of it that way. But the bigger issue is what's in their program. They want to create confidence. And so what we're trying to do is have programs that show the world, show their own people, that there's confidence in the recovery on the other side. One of the most important things that we can do in that is transparency. We need transparency both on the health side, meaning what is the situation for COVID, also on the debt side. What are the contracts that the governments are entering into? And that proves to be a major challenge that people all around the world are working on in order to make more transparency on the debt that's out there.
President Malpass, let's talk about that, because you understand how delicate this moment is for many of these economies and countries that you work with. What we need right now is grants and not loans. And what we need for a whole range of countries is debt relief. Can you talk to us about the scale of debt relief that you can help engineer in the coming months, the coming year?
Yes, and with regard to grants, your point is exactly right. And so as the World Bank looks at it, of this $160 billion, a big chunk, nearly a third, is grants, meaning not loans, but and no interest on it, no repayment. And so that becomes a very strong positive net flow for the countries. We're also trying to have, the G20 countries have agreed to a moratorium on repayments to their creditors. What the biggest of that is China, and it agreed to, and recently, within the last week, President Xi confirmed that China will fully participate in the moratorium. So in combination, that provides a big new chunk of available fiscal space for the countries we're talking about the 75 poorest countries in the world. It creates space for them to spend on the health emergency itself. So that's important. And what we need now is the commercial creditors to also come in. That means the asset managers, the banks. We're dealing with the poorest countries in the world, and I think they need to find a way that they can also accept a moratorium on the repayment stream so that there's more resources available for the countries. Everybody's working together. It's a sizable amount of money, but there's still quite a few steps to take with regard to especially China and the commercial creditors to have them fully participate. Also the Gulf states, I should mention that the Persian Gulf states have quite a bit of debt outstanding in the poorest countries, and there needs to be full participation by them also in the debt moratorium.
President Malpass, you have a unique position having visibility around the world, and I want to talk about China's presence as probably the dominant lender to developing nations over the past 5 years. I believe the estimates say that about $500 billion of loans that China has extended to some of these countries. Do you have any sense of what that nation's debt forgiveness plan might look like and how that will pressure some of these nations?
It's very important to the recovery of the poorest countries and others. Our President Xi included those remarks, and it was very welcome in a speech that he gave. I guess it was 2 weeks ago, where he said China would fully participate. And China is a member of the G20 countries, which endorsed this moratorium. So now we're at the point of implementation for China's official creditor agencies. That's the China Development Bank, China Exim Bank. These are official agencies of the Chinese government, and they need to fully participate in the moratorium. And then the next level will be the commercial creditors. That's the banks in China, for example, that have lent a lot. And it's not just China. They're one of many of the lenders that are able to participate. And that gives them, I think there's going to be a two-way benefit. The poorest countries themselves are helped immensely by this, but then the lender countries will be creating a better environment for the future. And so I'm hoping people will look to the longer run and see that if they participate now, there'll be a better environment in the future for their markets, for their exports and things and so on.
David, thank you for the hard work. It's been a while, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon. Hopefully we can continue this conversation. The president of the World Bank there, David Malpass. Tom, on the importance of grants and not loans, on market access as well, and just to compare and contrast what we've seen in the last 24 hours, Italy issuing 10-year debt and seemingly building up an order book of north of 100 billion euros. Just absolutely remarkable. The access to markets that developed nations, including the likes of Italy, have, and the struggle of others at a moment like this.
Francine Lacroix featuring that early this morning with that announcement, John, and it really dovetails nicely with the extraordinary Amazon deal yesterday. The flow of money right now is absolutely odd. Odd is the word I'd use. And John, you just got to believe some of it finally has to move to development, to those grants, and to infrastructure projects. And frankly, maybe the World Bank can help the United States do infrastructure.
Well, we need some help there, don't we? Look, central banks worldwide, developed markets, central banks as well, really engineering the situation that we're seeing in the bond market. Very easy to come in and out. The bond market wide open in the United States and across Europe as well. In your equity market, up around about 18 points on the S&P 500. We advanced 0.6% this Wednesday morning. Good morning to you all. This is Bloomberg.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, thank you very much. Demonstrators were out again in many cities across the nation. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti called for racial healing after he said he joined protest leaders. Garcetti said the LAPD will continue to go after those committing looting and violence, but urged peaceful protesters to seek justice and change nationwide.
We will go after people who are looting or worse, causing violence against demonstrators or to peace officers. But let's put that here and not let that dominate what this moment and this movement is about.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau fell silent for more than 20 seconds during a press conference after he was asked what he thought of President Trump forcefully dispersing protesters and calling for military intervention.
It is a time to listen. It is a time to learn what injustices continue despite progress over years and decades. But it is a time for us as Canadians to recognize that we too have our challenges.
Voters in Ferguson, Missouri made history with the election of their next mayor. City Councilwoman Ella Jones became the first woman as well as the first African American to become mayor of the St. Louis suburb. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, this is Global News 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
This is your Bloomberg Real Estate Report. I'm Denise Pellegrini. The rush to rent or buy single-family homes in the suburbs is on. Robert Schiller, economics professor at Yale and co-author of a well-known home price index, says it all reminds him of a similar trend in a different era.
In 1949, the Russians, or the Soviet Union, tested successfully an atomic bomb. And they also had missiles that they were developing. And this led to a mass exodus to the suburbs.
And Schiller says it's not all because of the work-from-home trend, COVID-19, and social unrest.
It's also that a lot of the charm of the central cities that it draws people in are going to be lessened, like eating out in nice different restaurants and going to museums and shows.
But don't expect prices in the burbs to jump dramatically from here, Schiller says. There's still plenty of space out there to build. And that's your Bloomberg Real Estate Report. I'm Denise Pellegrini.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our number one priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC.
Connecting decision makers to a...
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
At Asda, we've provided 3,500 care homes with priority access to delivery slots, and priority shopping hours are open to our care workers. We're also donating 250,000 face masks to care homes. Asda, we're all in this together. Please show ID for priority shopping. Check asda.com for times.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
Did you know that with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations broadcasting in your area? Discover local news, talk, and music stations. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn.
I see a V-shaped recovery because that's what the markets are telling us. If you look at every market around the world, they've gone up by 20, 30% or so. And I'm talking about both emerging and developed markets.
EM investor Mark Mobius on a V-shaped recovery. We're all so tired of hearing about that V-shaped recovery. I think it's fair to say we have a V-shaped recovery in the market. There's very few people that think we're going to see one in this economy, not just the United States, but worldwide as well. Good morning to you all. Alongside Tom Keane, I'm Jonathan Ferro, together with Lisa Abramowitz. We are live on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio. And Tom, I'll be stepping away to Bloomberg TV in just a moment. I'll be catching up with Julian Emmanuel of BTIG, far less constructive on this equity market rally. Looking forward to that conversation in a few minutes' time.
Yeah, on your way to your next project, John, maybe you can pick up your obligatory 8,000 shares of Zoom Info, 8,000 shares of the ever-popular Warner Music Group Corp. Or maybe, I just say, John, you can pick an IPO du jour because we are back to IPOs of the moment. John Farrell driving forward our conversation. And of course, into the middle of the morning here, John Farrell will have some important updates on the open, on the politics in Washington. Initial public offerings, I assume in somewhere in March, they were dead, but they come back with a vengeance. It's not that they come back, it's the way they've come back, much like that Italian bond offering of today, the Amazon offering of a few days ago. It's been a shock. Drew Singer writes for Bloomberg News on initial public offerings and joins us right now. Drew, how did we get back to IPOs so quickly?
Good morning. It's a nearly 40% rally in the stock market since late March is what's driving a lot of this activity. Companies and their largest holders are looking to raise cash while their stock is rising. And, our returns versus a year ago might not be what we would expect coming into 2020. But versus March, the market is red hot.
Yeah, Drew, and we're looking at the volume similar to what we saw before the pandemic took hold. And also a lot of the IPOs that we saw over the past few weeks and months have performed vastly better than other shares. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
Well, IPOs are riskier than an investment in the market at large. They have a very small float, and obviously it's a relatively new company with a short history of public quarterly financial reports. So risky investments, when the market is rising, they tend to outperform. I think that begs the question, though, of what happens if the market were to start falling. Generally, your riskier investments, such as IPOs, are going to underperform. And there's so many mounting risks out there right now, from China to the unrest here in the United States, that I think some investors are especially worried about some of those headwinds.
Although, Drew, the strongest of the bunch are the ones that are coming to market. To be clear, we had gotten a slew of special purpose acquisition companies that have basically a blank check to go out and buy anything, but also managed by very respected investment firms. Now we're seeing companies that already did the legwork for these IPOs come to market stronger. We're not seeing Airbnb. Can you talk a little bit about the strength of the companies, the nature of the companies that are able to do IPOs right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that whenever you're coming back from a long break in initial public offerings, investment bankers are trying to generate a little bit of momentum in the space and a little bit of excitement. So what they're looking to do is to start with the deals that they have the most confidence in. This is generally speaking, of course, that they're going to start with the IPOs that they think investors are really going to flock to. And then once those deals go public, they do well, then maybe you bring some IPOs that are a little bit more questionable because you can point to these recent debuts that are doing so well. So this week is the first week of several really big IPOs like ZoomInfo and Warner Music, but there have been some other IPO activity during this coronavirus crisis. We've had about 10 legitimate U.S. companies as opposed to these blank check companies go public since late February, and 8 of them closed yesterday above their IPO price. They're returning over 70% on average. So even this week, investment bankers have the ability to point to some recent deals in the market and go, look at how great these deals are trading. That's why you might want to jump into the next IPO, and maybe that one will go well too.
Drew, I got about 18 questions here, but are the reason they're up 70% or whatever number it's going to be for the next one, is it because they're finally pricing these things intelligently after the embarrassments of Uber, Lyft, and the rest of them?
I think it's hard to compare some of the recent IPOs we've seen to some of these monster deals like Uber and Lyft. I think that something like that is more similar to an Airbnb, which is probably going to come later this year or beyond, assuming that market recovery continues and IPOs continue to happen successfully.
Okay, Drew, I got the important question. Nobody cares except Pharaoh about getting the next 8,000 shares. How do you do a road show with social distancing? I mean, how far apart can the rubber chicken be at a given IPO lunch?
Well, what they've been doing is mostly doing it on Zoom, like the rest of us have been doing our jobs. But as my colleagues reported, these IPOs have been in the works for a long time, and some bankers have had the opportunity to meet with some investors before the social distancing measures came into place. It's kind of interesting, though, because we talk about direct listings like Spotify and Slack, and whether direct listings are going to gain any steam. And one knock against those deals was that there's no roadshow, there's no in-person, face-to-face interaction happening. Well, that's how all IPOs are happening this year, and we'll see if it works or not.
So, Tom, you were really traumatized by some rubber chicken that you had during one IPO roadshow or something, because this rubber chicken is the seminal memory that you have, the seminal association that you have with some of the marketing trends in investment banking.
It is. And what's interesting, Lisa, is the quality of the rubber chicken gets more rubbery based on the view out the window of the skyscraper. That's well known as well.
Well, Drew Singer, just really quick here, I want to get your sense of why companies would go to the equity market given how hot the debt world has been of late.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it is kind of case by case for each company. Warner Music, for example, most, if not all of this cash raise is going to selling shareholders. So you have other investors in these companies that are looking to get out at some point. And with the market up, 40% in the last few months, it might be the right time to do something like that.
Got to leave it there. Drew Singer, thank you so much. Looking at the initial public offering market, which is resurgent here, as is the rest of the market. I really want to emphasize that as we look at the politics of Washington, we look at really what has been an extraordinary 3 days and a better last night and a better morning here in America. We're still paying attention to what we're doing on economics, finance, investment. And in this simulcast, that is very clear. clearly been a beginning of 3 days of job coverage. A surprising ADP report, to say the least. No question about that. We move on to claims tomorrow, and then our complete coverage of the jobs report on Friday will go beneath the headline numbers at 8:30. Futures, as Mr. Sweeney would say, green on the screen. This is Bloomberg.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but...
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Airbags to kids. Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs. Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunnin to Fiala, he scores!
For a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic game replays to start listening.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything, from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
Kill O'Neal. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk off the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
Looking to freshen up your listening on TuneIn? Head to the homepage to discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage.
Trey Wingo here from ESPN's Golic and Wingo. Every morning, Mike Golic Jr. and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golic and Wingo to start listening today.
Wanna bet football can make you feel nostalgic?
Playing days are over, so...
On the podcast, NFL Alumni Lounge, Charlie Booth sits down with retired NFL legends to talk about their careers, life after football, and everything in between.
Mr. Darren Waller, good to have you.
Yes, sir, it's good to be here.
Dana White, welcome to the Alumni Lounge.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Big member of our NFL alumni family, the CEO of the XFL, Mr. Oliver Luck.
Charlie, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
We're here with the president, Mr. Eric Price. Good to see you.
Search NFL Alumni Lounge on TuneIn to listen.
It's TuneIn Sports on this day. On this day in 1980, the New York Mets draft Darryl Strawberry at age 18.
Here's Darryl warming up their third pitcher. Well hit to left center field. Out of here. Darryl Strawberry's first major league home run. Strawberry goes to the opposite power alley with great authority. It's a two-run home run.
To listen to conversations breaking down the moments just like this, search sports to be part of the discussion on TuneIn.
Talk about the losers in a trade war.
You benefit if you're just further away from China.
So that you can too.
What are the ramifications if she crumbles or doesn't crumble?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Bloomberg Surveillance, Economics.
Certainly we've got to put a floor under the economic carnage.
Markets didn't believe the coronavirus would take down the world economy.
Finance.
The sellers are not necessarily finished, but quite exhausted.
Investment.
That's the reality that we have to settle ourselves to. This is the start of a depression.
We're going to have a bounce back when everything is open. The question is, what is the shape of the economy from there?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Wednesday morning from New York City and points beyond to our worldwide audience. A calmer America overnight and a better-than-expected ADP jobs number greet us this morning. Equity futures are higher as the market begins to discount and reopening of the U.S. economy. Get a sense of where we are with the equity futures here. We welcome Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Wilson. Dave, what are you looking at this morning as we greet some green on the screen?
Well, I'm looking at results from a couple of companies that clearly benefited from the coronavirus pandemic. One of them is Zoom Video Communications. It's up 0.5% in early trading. The video conferencing company's earnings for the fiscal first quarter were more than twice the average analyst estimate in a Bloomberg survey. Revenue beat the average projection by 62%. People flocking to use Zoom service because they couldn't meet face-to-face.
It's almost a verb. Let's Zoom.
Yeah, absolutely. Campbell Soup's up 1%. The food maker now sees annual sales from continuing operations rising as much as 6.5% rather than being basically a little changed. Campbell also raised its fiscal year profit forecast after a surge in demand from stay-at-home consumers. Now, today we're going to get the debut of Warner Music Group. The record company will begin trading after a $1.9 billion initial public offering. The IPO was made by Warner's majority owner, Russian billionaire Len Blavatnik, and company executives. So we'll have to watch how that stock trades.
That was public before, then they went private, now they're coming public again.
Indeed, and you know it as well as anyone,
Paul, no
question.
The bankers win on both sides, Dave.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. In any case, Boeing's up 2.5%. The plane maker reached a settlement with German travel company TUI over costs tied to grounding of the 737 MAX jet. TUI said it will be compensated during the next 2 years for, quote, a large part of its expenses, which total about $414 million. Microchip Technology up 7%. The chip maker raised earnings and sales forecast for the fiscal first quarter ending this month and said supply disruptions out of Asia have eased. On the deal front, you've got Coty up 6.5%. Cosmetics maker said it's holding talks with Kim Kardashian West about a possible beauty product collaboration. Now, Coty has a majority stake in the cosmetics company founded by West's half-sister, Kylie Jenner. Tiffany, though, down 1.5%. The luxury jewelry retailer is lower for a second day after Women's Wear Daily reported that a $16 billion deal with France's LVMH may be unraveling here. LVMH's board met yesterday to discuss the transaction, according to that report. You've got cruise line stocks lower in early trading. Morgan Stanley saying a recovery in the industry is likely to take longer than the companies and investors expect. The firm cut ratings on Carnival, down 0.5% in early trading. Royal Caribbean, down 2%. And Norwegian, down 2%. And they are all now rated as the equivalent of sell at Morgan Stanley. And I got a couple of restaurant chains to talk about here real fast. Cheesecake Factory's up 9%. The company said dining rooms have reopened at about 25% of its locations, and it's aiming for 65% to be running by mid-June. And Red Robin Gourmet Burgers up 8.5%. The chain expects to have about 65% of its dining rooms open by Sunday.
Restaurants reopening, burgers, nice to hear. Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Wilson, thank you so much. Well, President Donald Trump's tweet recently that he would designate the group Antifa as a domestic terrorism organization is drawing criticism as unconstitutional and risking the diversion of resources from known terrorists. To get more details on this, we welcome Bloomberg Government Department of Homeland Security reporter Sean Courtney. Sean, tell us what's going on here.
Sure. Over the weekend, the president said on Twitter, unbeknownst to most anybody else in the national security front, that he wanted Antifa to be designated as a terrorist organization, a domestic terrorist organization. And so that kind of prompted people, former officials and members of Congress to, one, want to know if that's even constitutional, and two, to discourage the move, because the concern is that it could distract from targets like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and neo-Nazi groups that are funded with international funds.
Could you just help us understand what is Antifa?
Yeah, sure. It's like anti-fascist. And that's part of the problem, is that in order to be designated as a terrorist organization, you have to be organized. And Antifa is almost more of like a mindset, as some of the people I spoke with said, rather than some sort of organized group where you have to pay dues and there's memberships. They're by nature don't have any kind of infrastructure or leadership or anything like that. It's a people who just think similarly, who sometimes organize online at best. So, but yeah, they're anti-fascist. So they are out often opposing people like neo-Nazis and things like that. They will kind of counter-protest, essentially.
Okay, so there's no organization. I guess, are they considered an international terrorist group? I mean, is the question they're international and we're importing their terror to a domestic platform, or has that not even been defined yet?
No, I mean, I think that's the problem, is that they probably wouldn't meet the standard for an international terrorist organization. And Trump said he wanted them to be deemed a domestic terror organization.
What is that?
Yeah,
define that? I mean, you're the expert. Paul Sweeney, our domestic terror is our youngest child.
Exactly.
But what is a domestic terror group? I mean, I grew up in the 60s where, folks, this was a serious conversation. I mean, there was some real violence going on that nobody's going to make light of. It was deadly serious. Are we talking about that?
Well, so there is a part of U.S. code that defines what a domestic terrorism organization is, but it's basically at this point mostly just been used against people who have done something with like a WMD, and that's the only criminal statute that could apply. There is a term in U.S. code for domestic terrorism. It's people who are making threats to human life, violating criminal laws in the U.S. It's meant to coerce or the civilian population. But the problem is that there aren't any teeth to that. There's no corresponding criminal statutes, except if there's a WD element. So basically, the president would have to create a new set of laws in order to be able to make this happen, unless he just sort of issued some executive order and said, international terrorism standards apply to this group. And that is dangerous. And that's where people are saying this is likely unconstitutional, and they don't know how he'd be able to do it. So there were some concerns that it was just a matter of show. But, if he were to try and follow through on it, then the other concern is that it was unconstitutional. It could be monitoring U.S. persons, and that it would distract from other actual threats that we know are happening in the U.S. currently.
Sean, is there any evidence to date that Antifa, if it even really as an organization exists, is actually part of some of the civil unrest we've seen in the country over the last week or so?
So there's no widespread reporting that Antifa is organizing and getting people to come to these rallies. Are there possibly people who are protesting or, part of the more violent elements that have happened who have Antifa sympathies or who are anti-fascist? If that's entirely possible. There was some reporting out of Minnesota that maybe there was actually more the neo-Nazis were the problem, not Antifa. So right now it's not clear what this is based on. And actually lawmakers have asked the administration to please provide them with any kind of intelligence that would back up their claims or, help them suggest why they thought that they could do this.
A little bit of disagreement on his program. I mean, starting with Duke, North Carolina, and Red Sox, Yankees, and the rest of it. I would suggest the vast majority of our listeners, like 99.9, are anti-fascist. So what kind of anti-fascist are they?
Well, I think that's the problem. Is like that's the whole point of my piece and what people been saying is that I don't know how you could possibly, clump large portions of the American public who don't believe in fascism or wouldn't into some sort of domestic terror organization. So it would have to be some specific subset, but since they don't seem to have any kind of organization or structure, it's really not clear how you could do this. Meanwhile, there are groups that are actively trying to do
but I really make note, and I hate to say this, but Lisa Bramowitz was incredibly sharp today about, going out from the vanilla 2s10 spread and enjoying the 530 spread, which I guess is like a huge deal back 3 years, where we are getting that steeper yield curve many people are talking about is a good thing. Paul, are you surprised that we've had a V-shaped stock market?
I really am, but then I probably shouldn't be, because the one axiom that I learned first in this business 30 years ago, and it's the one that's still number one on my list, which is don't fight the Fed. And, just play, if interest rates are going down or down, that's good for the market. And that is exactly what we've seen here. We've seen a very aggressive Federal Reserve, Tom, in terms of injecting liquidity into the marketplace. And that's been... again, the phrase I like right here is the Fed is backstopping the market here, is backstopping risk tolerance here, and that seems to be the play. We've had some good fiscal stimulus as well, which has been hopefully helping American consumers, although arguably, if you listen to some of the governors, more fiscal stimulus is needed. But from an investor perspective, the liquidity and a backstop provided by the Fed has just been extraordinary.
And I'm glad you bring that up. This has been part of the discussion today across all of Bloomberg surveillance folks, including our simulcast on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. We're humbled by the response. Thank you for the many hate mails. Farrell gets all the love notes.
That's right.
I don't know what that's about, but I get the hate mail. And I really wonder if today's the day, with sort of an unpresidential schedule and maybe calmer streets, where we begin to get a Washington dialogue about the new fiscal support. Yeah, I just wonder if that's what's coming.
Yeah, you'd like to think that. I mean, again, as you listen to Governor Cuomo and some of the other governors around the country, states and local municipalities, that pay the firefighters and the teachers and the cops and things like that, they need some support here, and I think that's clearly what is hoped for in the next round of stimulus.
For our global audience and across the nation, let me give you a vignette of last night. Paul, I was in a war zone. And the good news is, of course, there was no shooting. It was a calmer night. I make jokes about it, folks, but with 2 helicopters propped above me, one of them just right outside my bedroom window, and looking down at endless sirens. And it was peaceful protesters moving up 3rd Avenue within the curfew. And I got on the police scanner, and I'll tell you, Paul, our police are something. Their geographic reach is just extraordinary.
Yes.
Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
For the Jewish Communal Fund, Noel Spiegel, former senior partner with Deloitte & Touche and past JCF president, discusses the advantages of a donor-advised fund over a private foundation.
There's a lot involved in having a private foundation. You need to engage attorneys, you need to engage accountants, file tax returns. At JCF, all of that is done for you. You don't have to get involved in anything other than making your contribution to your fund and then determining which grants that you want to make.
A JCF fund may be opened with a minimum $5,000 contribution of cash or appreciated securities and can be used as an alternative to or together with a private foundation.
If you have a foundation, you have to list all of the contributions that you made. Potentially anybody, because the information is public, can find out exactly which organizations a foundation has made charitable contributions to.
Let JCF simplify your philanthropy and protect your privacy. Learn more about JCF's private client group at jcfny.org.
If you can build that flat-pack wardrobe without looking at the instructions, you've still got it. If you can manage 5 keepy uppies on your first go, you've without question still got it. If you can toss a pancake to the ceiling and not let it hit the floor, surely you've still got it. And if you can just about fit into those jeans you bought 5 years ago, you've definitely still got it. Brute, still got it.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
This is a message from the government.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Hi, good morning. I'm Karen Moscow along with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney. And the opening bell is brought to you by SEI. Crisis and challenges highlight the power of partnership and character. Work for the common good. One community, SEI. Go to SEIC.com/banks. The S&P 500 is up 0.7% at the open, up 22 points at 3102. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 0.9% or 235 points at 25,983. And the Nasdaq is up about 0.5% or 42 points at 9650. 10-year Treasury down 11 30 seconds, yield 0.72%. The yield on the 2-year 0.18%. NYMEX crude oil is up 0.1%, up 7 cents at $36.89 a barrel. COMEX gold down 1.4% on $24.40 at $17.0940 an ounce. The euro 1.1203 against the dollar. The yen is at 108.69. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much, Karen. Greatly appreciate that. An important headline here, CBOE, the Chicago Board, to postpone Chicago trading floor reopening until June 15th. I don't know the background on that, folks, but Paul, I would suggest we're going to see a lot of this.
He's putting people together in a closed space and have these guys screaming back and forth like you've seen, in movies and TV shows. I mean, folks down on the floor there are just...
In the defense of corporate officers gaming 2021, you just wonder, how do we get to August or July, for that matter?
Exactly.
I remember in March we were modeling May 15th, rocket launch, let's go, and that didn't happen, and here's CBOE up to June 15th. We now begin a 4-hour conversation, lecture, and good discussion with Thomas Fingar. He's at Stanford University, which doesn't begin to describe his impact on our State Department thinking, his impact on how we do policy internationally. It would be good to speak to him. Long ago and far away, I would love to have done an interview with the laureate Thomas Schelling and Thomas Fingar. That didn't happen. But I've got Thomas Fingar now, Paul, and that is a good and beautiful thing. I don't know where to begin, sir, but I would say at some point this will be over and we will have to rebuild the State Department back to some sense of what it was. Do we go back to something, or do we have to rebuild forward to something completely new?
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. I think we need to look more forward than backward. But what's going to take not just the State Department, but across the government, a very extensive rebuilding, reform of institutions that have lost people, lost their way. It's not simply a matter of going back, because the world is different, and we need to build for the future. It's going to be a very difficult task.
Within building for the future, there has to be a respect for how we got here. And how we got here with the president's populism, with the president's success in winning, was a belief that Washington wasn't serving and that Foggy Bottom was foggier than foggy could ever be. That voice is out there in America, a distrust of the new norms because of China. And this is, sir, with your expertise on China. How do we balance the romance of a multilateral America, a Washington consensus, with the reality that there's bipartisan support? We don't trust China. How do we do that?
Yeah, well, this is a difficult, very, very difficult challenge, because along with the bipartisan liberal conservative agreement that China is a problem, we have the repeated polling results that Americans favor our international engagement. We're not an isolationist country. So finding the right balance between the way in which we deal with the world and the way in which we deal with the other major players in the world is a challenge.